To the podcast. I'm your host, Tommy, with my co-host, Ryan. How you doing today, Ryan?
I am nifty. I'm dandy. I got a new set going on. I got some books. Makes it look like I read.
You're going professional.
I know. I got the thesaurus. I got the dictionary. You can't see it. It's off screen, but I got it all. I got all the words.
It's certainly a level up for the toilet roll background anyway, but
we're moving on.
That's it. Today, we're actually glad to have DaveChawner on. He's been a really amazing activist and mental health advocate over the years, talking about his story from eating disorder recovery. He's actually a comedian, and Ryan's a comedian as well. So
amateur.
I feel like it's here. Yeah, but a lot of people have called me a comedian in the past, but not for that reason. So thanks very much for coming on, Dave. You want to just introduce yourself and a little bit about yourself to let everybody know who you are and things?
Yeah, I'm Dave, and I wish I could say I'm nifty or dandy, but I kind of, those are levels that I aspire to. Those are words that I have not heard in ages. I love, particularly the word dandy. And I just created a new word there because I said specifically. So my name is Dave. I'm an author, a comic, and a presenter. I have my own lived experience of anorexia, which I've done a book about, and that's me. And I'm learning a lot about myself in lockdown, which I think a lot of other people are as well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I would say I am a changed man. I've learned a few new skills. I've learned how to correctly do laundry, so that's been great. I've learned that the voices in my head are very real. So that's where I'm at in lockdown.
Very, very.
I think everybody can relate to that, because I think during this lockdown, things have been really intensified for a lot of people, because you've got that much spare time that you kind of get lost in your own thoughts a lot. So it's about trying to distract yourself, as we've already talked about in the podcast before, haven't we, Ryan?
Yeah, and actually I was curious because you are a comic, and that's something that I've been able to kind of use as, probably coping mechanism is the right word, and I've used it for a lot of other underlying things that I've had to confront later on in my life. But I always use comedy as kind of a crutch. And I wondered if comedy, though, was a way of helping you get through maybe some of your hardest times when you were like in the deepest hell of that anorexia mindset.
Oh, absolutely. And strangely, Ryan, you've actually just kind of like touched on something that I'm so excited about at the moment, because I'm in the process of creating a 6-week comedy course for people with lived experience of mental illness, because comedy is all about communication. It's all about connection. It's all about confidence. And one of the things I found so difficult about being anorexic was that kind of isolation. And also, I don't want to have a go at people, because I think one of the things that was most isolating for me is that I was surrounded by such lovely people that they didn't want to say the wrong thing. They didn't want to offend me. They didn't want to upset me. But part of that was it kind of manifested that people didn't joke with me anymore. People didn't play pranks on me anymore. People didn't just have a laugh. It was all very like hushed, muted, and metered conversations of like, so how are you? And that made me feel kind of like, oh my God, I'm so different. So I think comedy used well and properly, so not actually joking about something, joking around it. So we're not bullying people. We're using comedy in order to break things down, understand it, and try and use that to explain it to other people.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point, because, and this is kind of like a departure from anorexia in general, but just around the conversation of comedy. I've been rewatching like all of these great classic comedy films by like Mel Brooks the last few days. I watched like Spaceballs. I watched Blazing Saddles. We watched one other one. Young Frankenstein. I was watching them, and a lot of these, I feel like there's this departure in comedy from comedy being used to maybe make a point. And now comedy seems to just be like, oh, let's see how edgy I can be and how much of a dick I can be in a situation. And that's pushed off now as satire. You know what I mean? When it's clearly them just being a douche. Like I think I think that'd be interesting. Could you maybe elaborate more on how someone can harness comedy in that way? Because I also run into this problem with self-deprecating humor, which is like it's personally one of my favorites. Just, but it's also kind of like you're beating yourself up constantly, so like subconsciously with it. So how do you kind of get around those things?
I think that's such a good point, because comedy can be a very diseased coping mechanism as well. And actually, we know that, your brain listens to what you say. And if you constantly say, I'm a douche, I'm a failure, I'm terrible, you'll start to believe that. So it's about trying to sort of see what underpins that. But I think comedy is in such an exciting, at least over here, I don't know what it's like in the States, but you've got people like Felicity Ward, who talks about her anxiety. You've got Sophie Hagen, who talks about fat positivity, body positivity. You've got people like Janine Haruni, who just was nominated for the Perrier for talking about what it's like being a woman. You've got Sarah Pascoe, who talks about feminism. It's incredible and amazing time, as well as Rosie Jones, who has, I think it's MS, that really is a huge disability to her body, but not to her life. And I think it's that ownership. So I think a couple of things that I would sort of cover in the course is it comes down to ownership of what you can own. So if I started making jokes about how difficult it is to be a Canadian single mum, then people would be like, well, what's he actually know about that? Whereas Catherine Ryan eloquently and brilliantly makes those jokes because she owns that. She knows what that's like. And the edginess, people have called like what I do edgy, and I'm like, that's like calling Elmo a drug addict. Like I think I'm the least edgy person in the world. You see, Tommy's there agreeing with Elmo being a drug addict. That's but I think it's there's a difference between joking around and joking about, and the crux of that comes to who is the butt of that joke. If you are, and there's, I think a very common one, and I'm not having a go, and I don't want to be all snowflakey about it, but OCD. I've heard jokes made about OCD that are brilliant, and also that are perhaps a little bit troubling. And normally that comes down to, there are some brilliant, like Joe Wells is an incredible comic that does amazing jokes about his OCD. Amazing. Whereas if it was me making jokes about OCD, still can be great, but you want that to be in order to sort of push people's knowledge forward, rather than just go, oh, I've got to flick the light switch off like 20 times before I get up. That's probably not helpful.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's about finding that kind of fine line like you talked about there, because what really kind of struck me about all your kind of advocacy in the past, you were kind of broke barriers down for me, and I've been following you for years, as you know, and I felt the way you were kind of putting out information, it was putting that humour into it, and it was giving people a kind of different perspective, because we always like to hear the kind of doom and gloom about mental health and things like that. And it was a really good way to kind of break down those barriers, have that bit of humour in, but also as well, giving it the real hard points that hit home as well.
And this is the thing that really gets me, especially with mental health, is like you say, it's a lot of doom and gloom, which when you actually think about it, forgive the pun, is mental, because like mental health, when done well, is the best thing in the world. It's the most incredible, exciting, fun, enjoyable thing. So I don't understand why it is a lot of doom and gloom. That's like doing a show about birthdays and it always being like, people crying, which there are many people, but mental health when done well is brilliant, and that's what I think is incredible and important to focus on.
So I guess I would be kind of curious, because for people that are unfamiliar with your story, how did anorexia sort of manifest for you? Because I think anyone speaking to you now would never know that you had ever gone through any of those struggles at all.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think for me, firstly, it kind of developed rather than began, and that's not me sort of being semantic. It's just like I didn't realize that I had anorexia for a long time, because a lot of these like disease things became my normality. So I started weighing myself, sort of once a day, and then it became 2 times, then it became 3 times. Then I started rushing home from school, and I started calorie counting, which, on the face of it, if you're trying to lose a little bit of weight, good. But then I started constantly calorie counting, and I wasn't really concentrating on conversations because I was constantly thinking, well, did that apple have X amount of calories, and then plus that with the squash that I had, and constantly it was like background processing. And over time, the grip kind of tightened and tightened and tightened, and it became something that was no longer I was in control of. It was controlling me. And the thing that's odd and weird is like a lot of, and I do a silly joke about this, but I was a sort of teenager at the time when it developed, and I kept on running up to my room and I was doing loads of press ups, sit-ups and whatnot. And when I asked my mom and dad about, you know, what was going on, I said, why did you never say anything about the exercising? And they said, well, Dave, when your teenage son keeps on running up to his room and all you can hear is rhythmical banging followed by repeated grunting. And it's those sort of silly little things. And I think that's where comedy is beautiful, to prick the bubble of, we can take things so serious, to just shift that mindset and go, oh, wow. But yeah, it kind of developed for me simply as a disease coping mechanism. I'd got exams, I'd got university coming up, I'd got problems with girls, etc. And it didn't really matter to me over time that I didn't get an A on that paper. It didn't matter to me that Durham had rejected me. If I could get that little win in the form of my weight dropping, eating less calories and exercising more, and it became a shortcut to feeling good at a time when that became incredibly difficult.
I think that's the kind of misconception around eating disorders. A lot of people think they're weight orientated and it's all about weight and body image, but it's actually a coping skill. Like you talked about there, it was for you, it was to deal with all the stresses that you had in your life at that time. For me personally, it was surrounded around grief and things like that. And I didn't, just like you, I didn't realise I even had an eating disorder, because way back in 1997, you didn't even hear males having eating disorders, and people were turning around to me and saying, you've got an eating disorder. And I was like, what even is an eating disorder? And then I learned about it and I said, no, I've still not got an eating disorder. I'm just getting fitter and fitter and fitter. And like you, I was up doing like press ups all night long and things like that. And insane.
No, it's so I guess it's not really shocking, but it's so fascinating how similar, whenever we have somebody on, how similar everyone's story is. It's always, it's a different circumstance, but it's always like at the root, it's always the same problem. It's always like trying to cope with some other issue, like you were mentioning, Tommy, with dealing with loss, and I dealing with certain insecurities about myself and my situation in life at the time, much like you, Dave, just trying to get those little wins to make yourself feel valuable. And I think that's kind of what a lot of people that have dealt with these issues is, that they just want to feel, does that make sense? They want to feel valuable or something like that. They want to feel like they're worth something because they feel less than in the moment.
I agree on the surface, but I would slightly disagree. This is like an A-level maths problem. I agree with the answer. I don't agree with the logic.
As long as I get points for the work in between, that's all that matters.
No, come on, keep it.
Smiley star. For me, I completely agree with so much you were saying, and I do get the valuable thing, and I think that's a really hard concept to get your head around. But I think there's a lot in that. The only thing that I suppose I would add into the mix is like, your brain is like the most powerful computer that you will ever have. And if someone gave most of us a supercomputer, none of us would really know how to switch it on, how to use it. But if you sort of, built one from scratch, you kind of learn bits and bobs, but there's always going to be stuff processing in the background that you don't even know. How many times have you used your phone and it's been slow and you've just got no idea why? And that's exactly the same with the brain. And I actually think a lot of these disease coping mechanisms subliminally come out because I never had the words to explain that I never felt good enough, that I was scared of my masculinity, that I was scared of my sex drive, that I was competitive, but felt really, really guilty about that. I also felt guilty about putting other people through those things. I felt jealousy, which is a terrible, but I couldn't put my fingers on those things. So when people sort of said, you all right? I was like, ugh. So I used my body to show that there was something wrong with my brain.
Yeah, no, that's very good. That's a very, very good way of putting it. Yeah. I would agree with that.
I also nicked that
totally.
from my girlfriend's thesis, so yeah.
It's fair game.
Yeah, I think as well, like you talked about there, the jealousy and things like that, that was something I had quite a lot. And I must say that when I had an eating disorder, I think that I hurt the people that love me the most, because you find out that you lash out at them, you turn everybody away, and it's kind of like you become possessed with this kind of demon that's inside you, and it's really, really hard to talk about. And I think Ryan's kind of spoke about that before, like he said the same kind of thing. He's lashed out at those he loves and things like that, and it's a difficult thing to navigate.
I think some of the hardest part, and this isn't for everyone, because I was fortunate in that my family has always been very supportive, almost too supportive, in a way enabling, because of how supportive they are. But because of that, I wasn't able to see my problem because I never really was confronted ever. I don't even think they ever questioned anything, really, till it was like really, really bad. And then and then you're in such a denial mindset that you're not willing to listen to it anyways.
See, that really resonates with me, purely because what you sort of said, my mom was a nurse, and her way of supporting was to sort of tell me what went on. So everyone kept on telling me that I had anorexia, which was just a yet another thing that was out of my control. I wasn't even now in control of having a mental health diagnosis. Whereas genuinely, I don't believe in these Hollywood sort of starry-eyed turning points, but the nearest, one of the few nearest that I ever did get in my sort of anorexia journey, my story, was someone actually turned around to me and said, you know what, mate, I've had bulimia 3 or 4 times. I've had like therapy for it, and it's proper tough. And in this environment, I was in a specific environment. I could explain it later, but she sort of said, in this environment, I find it like proper tough. Have you ever thought that you might be anorexic? The fact that someone said, have you ever thought that you might be, was like, actually, you know what? I thought about nothing else, but everyone keeps on telling me. And because I'm stubborn as a mule, I'm never going to go, you know what? Yes, you're right, in those arguments when people are shouting at you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and we've said it so many times, but we probably can't say it enough. It's like, it really comes down to the moment when you're willing to realize that you have a problem, I guess. Like, it has to come from your own brain or whatever.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Kind of like I've said all along, you've got to become sick and tired. I've been sick and tired, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those things where you can even be, because I've been there. Even when I was in like more quasi recovery, like years after I had been at my lowest, I would say that I still was, I would constantly be like, oh man, I need to gain weight. But there's always like that roadblock in your head that stops you, even though like consciously, you should be doing it. And you even want to, from a part of you, but there's always that little bit that holds you back. And it's always about having to push against those thoughts, I guess.
Yeah, and I think as well, when you're talking about gaining weight there as well, that's kind of the problem I had with therapy and things like that. I think it was too body image orientated.
Yeah, that really mind effed me, actually, was because that's the whole problem with how everything's set up right now, with how they look at it, especially like physicians. It's only physically focused when it's like 99% in here. So I think that was a lot of the issue, was that finding people that know that difference is like crucial to being able to get past that and recognizing that.
Yeah. And when you refeed as well, some of the stuff that goes on is mental, and apparently it's quite common. And I've never heard someone like sort of like an academic. Well, I've heard academics talk about this anecdotally, but no one's actually done any sort of research on it really. But like, when you start to refeed, one of the things that I was terrified of is having a sex drive and wanting sex. And when you refeed, all of those hormones come back. So I was like 24, but I was acting like a 13-year-old, like just staring at boobs, busy dribbling while unable to do anything else. And so odd. And that's just one example of which there's like loads.
Well,
that's it. I think we've actually talked about that on here before, because we had Tabitha Ferraro and she kind of spoke about that. She said that when you actually nutritionally rehabilitate, it gets to the point that your body's been kind of shut down and everything begins to kind of flood back. All the feelings are more raw. So that's when you're hardest, that you've really got to deal with things the most.
So I have a question for you, Dave, because you're a comedian. And I'm just thrilled. You're the first comedian we've ever had on. I'm excited. How did comedy was comedy always sort of a thing for you? Because for me, I was always like that class clown kid who always like messed around and tried to make people laugh in class. Or did it kind of come out of like this difficult time in your life through your teens into your earlier adulthood? Did that kind of like give birth to who you are now as a comic? I'm just curious.
It's a really interesting point, because I've got sort of different stages with comedy, because I've always like joked around, and I've always loved like having a laugh and whatnot. When I was a kid, I didn't realize there was a thing called stand-up. I didn't realize there was a comedy scene. I knew there was sitcoms and stuff, but that was stuff that other people did, you know. But I think comedy originally kind of actually started in a very similar way to like the anorexia, because like when I was at school, I was never sporty, I was never cool, I was never geeky or intelligent. I never had a thing. Whereas I sort of picked up very early on that if you could make people laugh, you can get away with a lot of stuff. And that became my kind of sort of thing, my coping mechanism, that, you know, sort of like I realized that people, you know, without sounding arrogant, might hang out with me if I could make them laugh. But one of the things that I've realized that really was a change for me when I went away to university was I'd learned about stand-up then, and I went to this comedy club, and as I saw so much comedy and I became obsessed with it, became a huge comedy nerd, I realized that like all of the acts that we saw were talking about being single or being broke or being freaks or being camp or
those are kind of like the comedy tropes nowadays. Yeah.
And they never fitted in, and comedy was just a way of polishing that turd. And I realized that, oh god, actually you can use comedy to say things that in polite society you wouldn't get away with, and you can use it as a foil.
Unfortunately, I would argue that that's changing a little bit over here.
Yeah, did you not see that thing where Isaac Butterfield, they tried to cancel him because he made some comment? What was it about? Was it about the Australian
it's all freaking ridiculous.
Fires or something?
It's all ridiculous.
Unbelievable.
But it's actually very funny, because we're almost the same person. If I was British, like you're my British me, who's, you know, probably a little funnier, but it's okay.
I think the biggest like difference here is live comedy. So clubs have only just started opening up here, and I swear to God, so I work for this very right-wing radio station. It's sort of slightly right of Hitler. Shouldn't really say that, so I'm not going to mention it. But I'm sort of wheeled out. Yeah. Murdoch has a lot of lawyers. But I'm wheeled out as their kind of token lefty, and people always say, "Oh, you can't say anything." Go to a live comedy club, because online people get very precious and blah 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 because they're hiding behind a keyboard. I did a gig last week. It was my first gig back, and some of the stuff that was said, I was like, "Oh my god!" And I think that the live circuit will go very much the other way. I think you're right.
I think you're right. I went to a few live shows right before COVID started, because I did stand up like a few times when I was fresh out of right before I got into my anorexia craziness. I started doing some stand up right out of high school when I graduated, because I did it for my talent show, and I totally just ripped my school's like district apart. I got threatened with suspension because what I did, this is kind of a side story, but what I did was you have to get your material approved by the administration of your school. So I gave it to them, but it wasn't really what I was going to do. So I did something completely different at the thing. But I did it for the same reason you did initially, like comedy. You were looking at ways to fit in, because I was never really good at sports. I was never popular really in like the general sense, but I knew that I could get people's attention if I was funny, like, and it worked. So this is just also just a bunch of other coping issues that I've had with self-esteem that also led into anorexia and all that stuff. But yeah, you're totally right about being up on stage and people saying things that you wouldn't probably say otherwise online because of the keyboard warriors out there or whatever.
I think that's why comedy, I don't think the live circuit will sort of die because of free speech. I think it'll be other things that kill it. But no, I think that in terms of like the free speech things, like I say earlier on, you can actually get away with a lot of stuff if you make people laugh. But online, you can't tell tone, you don't know anything about that person, and you don't have that connection. But the most important thing with stand-up isn't jokes, it isn't the lines, it isn't what you say, it is that connection with the audience.
It's always the connection.
Be the funniest person in the room, but if nobody's listening to you, it don't matter. So that's what you get in live comedy, is connection. Whereas online, you can have anyone retweeting whatever. They don't care if you're sitting in your room crying. They can't see that. And it gets rid of that connection, which is so vital. So I actually think, and I'm getting increasingly, unfortunately, I would have, I've been described as a far left activist, but I feel like we're getting so polarized at the moment that there's no one in the middle. You're either far left or far right. And the thing that really annoys me about the left wing, and this is me going on a little bit of a rant, but it really frustrates me that you can be pro, stop global warming, stop emissions, you want to be part of the single trade, you want to be part of EU, immigration, bring it on. But even if you question, and I use this as an example, even if you question for want of learning sort of about trans rights, because I don't know about trans, like I'm not a trans person, I don't understand. So I'm asking to learn, but there's almost this thing that even if you ask in order to better, in order to learn, in order to love more, then bam, you're straight out of the club. And the right wing doesn't have that. You could still be right wing and still think, you know what, I don't really like the idea of global warming. And it feels like the left wing is becoming more and more and more exclusive. That if you're not fully, if you haven't put, sort of Black Lives Matter in your Twitter profile, you're out. Whereas I find that absurd.
Yeah, no, that's totally right. That's something that's like frustrated me over here a lot, because I personally hate Donald Trump and I want to get him out. But at the same time, it's like everyone, it's like people on the left are crazy too.
Donald's the man.
Yeah, but that kind of talking about that as sort of like an exclusive club per se. In the anorexia like community, in the mental health community, in the recovery like community or whatever, do you think, and I'm not saying that this is what I think necessarily, I'm just posing a question. Do you think that there's also sort of I don't know. I feel like do you think there's a right way and a wrong way purely to approach recovery then? You know what I mean? Or is it kind of gray? Because I feel like everybody is a little different. You know what I mean? So
I would personally say it's individual, but
because I just see people that are in the community say certain things about, you can't do this, can't say this, any of that, and then that's in a way polarizing too, because sometimes by shutting out those words or whatever, you're only kind of hiding more of the issue, I guess. Because I feel like to get to full recovery, you need to be able to take it all, kind of. You know what I mean? So I think there are moments where restriction of certain ideas or pushing certain things isn't good on people that are struggling. But at some point, you got to expose them to a wider range of ideas or something. Does that kind of make sense? It's kind of like a similar situation, where it's like, at some point you got to be willing to take it all. You know what I mean?
I think if there is a right and a wrong way to recovery, I think the only right thing, because everyone is diverse and different, and that's beautiful.
Totally.
But I think the only universalizable thing about recovery that you could say to pretty much anyone, and I can't really think of any scenario where this like perhaps doesn't work, but if you are in recovery from something, be prepared to screw up. I think that's the end of, and I think the problem comes again with this binary of like, I'm recovered or I'm ill. No, there is a whole spectrum in between. And you know what, like in recovery, there are numerous days where you will screw up. I still screw up now, and you'll feel terrible, but actually what will push you back further is telling yourself in your mind that you are now ill again, or you're now rubbish, and you now need to, no, you're gonna have good and bad days. You're going to screw up. And I think that's the only universalizable thing that I can think of, is that in recovery you still are not infallible.
Yeah, totally. What I would say to that as well, I can agree with that, because I've been now recovered for quite a while, and just like you said, some days I totally beat myself up. I think I'm not worthy. I'm constantly searching for this universal purpose. It's like, but I think that's part of the eating disorder kind of spectrum, that you're always looking for this purpose, and rather than just living in the moment and actually accepting that you're here for a reason, and your reason's just to be as in be.
And I would argue that that's just the human condition. Everyone's searching for purpose. And I think we put way too much pressure on ourselves with stuff like that, because I've had this weird, I think of myself as just another animal on this earth. And, I don't think that like dogs and cats concern themselves very often with purpose. And so when I get really deep into that mindset, that's kind of what I kind of like let it go. My purpose, right? Yeah, I think sometimes you got to think, when you're thinking big like that, it can be overwhelming. You kind of got to condense it and be like, okay, what's my purpose in this moment? I kind of condense it to the moment, so that otherwise you're always trying to live in the future. And that was something that I did in my recovery too, was I was always looking in the future and not focusing on now, so that I never was going to get there, because I had no plan. I was never taking any steps. I was just thinking like, you know what, this is where I want to be. But I didn't think of like any steps that I would have to take to get there, especially mentally. And that's something that really like took me up until a year ago to like figure out, like, even when I had gained weight or whatever, like I'm still effed up, like really bad. So it's a process, and it's going to be a process forever. And it may not be necessarily an anorexic issue mindset forever, but there's always going to be something. So you just got to have your mind prepared that you're always going to be making some mistake. You're always going to be learning from that, and you're going to do better from that. And then you're going to make another mistake, and you're going to have to learn from that. It's just the human experience. And so I think you have to accept it.
I think there's also this worry as well, like potential worry of like with recovery, that you can kind of overthink it a little bit as well. But I see so many people in the kind of community like overthinking, like I've got to do this, and then I've got to do that, and then I've got to do that, and like and actually like I think actually one of the best things that came, especially in my sort of like therapy, was to just dick about and like just try stuff. And it was like everyone has good and bad days, and there might be reasons, there might not, but sometimes there isn't always a reason.
No, and sometimes you don't need a reason.
It's always the same as well. You see a lot of people saying there's a specific diet to recover, whether that's
I was going to talk about
vegan, carnivore, or whatever. I did vegan for a long while as an ethical vegan, and then my health declined and I had to change about it. And like I say, there's no one specific diet for any human being. I think there's a whole spectrum, and like we've got to find what's best for us. But at the end of the day, a specific diet is not going to help you recover from an eating disorder, because it's all about up here first and foremost.
I think we can universally agree that certain things are less good for you than other things, but there's not a one size fits all. Everybody's so goddamn different. I wish there was a one size fits all. That would be freaking great. I would have to not think about it at all. But that's the other thing too, is you have to let it go. So I just like, some days I just like, fuck it. I don't plan jack shit for that day at all. And I just wing it,
The one thing we can for certain say that we biologically, what we knew we ate before, at least that is part of it.
That's exactly, honestly, that's how I've been running it. And you don't know this, Dave, but I have some like other neuro issues. So when I think about diet, the way I approach it is I don't consider it really restrictive. Actually, I eat more diversity of food than I've ever eaten before. But I think about it more of just like, okay, what did ape me eat 1,000 years ago? And I just kind of forage like that throughout the day, and that's kind of my process. But
are you paleo then? Is that paleo? I mean,
I guess it's paleo, but I cheat a little bit. Don't tell my doctor. Okay.
Yeah, the paleo crew will be coming for you now, Ryan. You've outed yourself.
but you just got to find what works for you. I just think anything that's really hardcore, I think maybe I'll be a little liberal and say like you can do it for a short time period. But anything that's like a long-term, super restrictive, controlling thing, you know that's like messing with your brain. That's a mind F. And if you don't realize it, you just haven't realized it yet, because it's just not like humans were not made to like think this deeply about what we're eating, right? You know what I mean? If you think about it, we were not concerned with the amount of carbs or the amount of like certain nutrient we were getting. We knew we needed enough, but we would just kind of do it naturally. So you kind of got to get back to that state of just being able to do it through like osmosis almost, if that makes sense. And that's the hardest part, is getting back to
I feel like in the 90s, you had people like up until the 90s, you had people that just had wine and they just enjoyed it. And then you had wine wankers that came along that was like, oh, this is a split grape. And I feel like we're getting that way with food now.
They're all over.
You know, and like people, oh my God, I love food so much. Like one of my mates said, like, I love it to bits. But like, for example, I went around there and she had I said, oh, do you want a smoothie? And I was like, oh yeah, lovely stuff. I love a banana and strawberry smoothie. She started putting kale in, she'd blended shoes, there was a IKEA flat pack, it was like ridiculous. And I was like, and she's like, oh my God, I love cooking so much, I find it so relaxing. I'm like, you're literally playing with knives and fire. It is the least relaxing thing in the world. And I feel that we've kind of gone, and don't get me wrong, I went for a long period of being like a coffee wanker, and you just take things too far. As long as you're aware of that, you lead into that, then fine, have a go. But just
that's the key right there. Those words you just said, being aware,
self-awareness.
If that is the like legitimate theme, two themes, comedy and awareness are the themes of this podcast. Like, especially when you're doing comedy, you better be aware of what you're saying, I hope.
Well, that is exactly the point. And I think that's what's really important actually with comedy, is in order to joke about something properly, you have to understand it. And actually comedy is a great way of showing if you don't understand it.
I think it's also a great way of understanding yourself. I think your comedy says a lot about who you are. So kind of and this will be interesting. Maybe you can talk about your course as we kind of head into the end of this a little bit, and just give us like a sneak peek of what you're trying to dive into to help people discover about themselves. Because I found I spent a lot of COVID early on, because I was like, oh, I was going to get back into stand-up myself. And with things closed down, I just had a lot of time to write and reflect. And in doing so, I learned so much about how I thought about the world around me and myself. And it was kind of an eye-opening experience. So maybe you can get into that a little bit.
Oh, definitely. Well, like comedy, like mental health, there is not a one size fits all, because if there was, we'd have done it right now.
It would have been boring by now too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There is no one size fits all. If like writing jokes is easy, everyone would do it. But I think that's what I'm trying to get across in the course, is the fun of that process. Maybe you enjoy doing stream of consciousness. Maybe you enjoy being more analytical. Maybe you enjoy looking at things from a different angle. And one of the things, I'm doing a free taster session at the moment. One of the things I think has been particularly well received, that's really interesting, is I do it like virtually at the moment, and I'll take sort of people in a group and I will sort of say, okay, I'll give you three topics, and the three that I did with, so I did it with the Mental Health Foundation, and they were emotions, social media, or Boris Johnson. And I said, I want you to be unreasonable, I want you to be dogmatic, and I want you to be just completely blind, that you either love or you hate that thing. Now you can imagine with Boris Johnson how that kind of went, especially with very left people. And so I said, right, I'm going to give you a minute to write all of the things you either love or hate. Fine, did that, gave some of the solution, gave some of the things back, which was very funny. And then I said, one of the things that we find with, specifically with eating disorders, but with a lot of mental illnesses, is rigid thinking. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to spin that round. And if you hated Boris Johnson, you have to love him. Think of all of the things that you love about him. Doesn't even have to be him as a person. It can be how he talks, where he comes from. I want you to love him. And it was really interesting to break down those rigid binary thought processes and actually using, and actually the stuff that came up was genuinely very versatile, very funny. And it was incredible that people, used Boris Johnson as a hate figure, but actually kind of then realized, oh, he's just a human like the rest of us, trying to do the best. Exactly. And maybe that's the best for him. And maybe that's what makes him selfish, but he's still trying his best.
And you've got to kind of put yourself into his kind of shoes. Would you do any better in his situation? Probably not.
No, that's a good point. For sake of my hate for Donald Trump, I'm never going to do that, though. I need to hate him to survive.
Ryan, I actually thought that was a MAGA hat you had on there. Actually,
it is a MAGA hat. It is a MAGA hat. I got it as a joke. I got it as a joke for some videos, and I pasted over it, "Make America Ballin' Again." But I honestly like the red. I like the red, but I don't ever see anyone else wearing it out. I wear it out as almost like a meme because I think it's funny. But the funniest part is it's not even his quote; it's Reagan's. But whatever. But
can I just interrupt? I love the idea of being a live walking, talking meme. That is one of the best things I've ever heard.
There's still time. There's still time. You can find your way. I'm sure.
That's brilliant.
But no, I really appreciate you coming on and kind of opening up about that, because I think I'm excited to kind of see how your course goes. You have to keep in touch, because I'd really be interested in have you on maybe after you have some, I don't want to use the word like data, but after you've had some experience with other people working on it and just seeing how the results are coming out. We'd love to have you on and talk about how that came out and maybe what you're altering moving forward, because I'd love to get that information to people.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I think it is going to be one of those, and that's why I'm really excited about it. I did a couple of taster sessions with like my mates, and the weakest thing, the thing that I thought was appalling, was actually the thing that they thought they got the most out of, and the thing that they loved. So I think this whole process, I am very open to it and open to not having the answers. So maybe 12 months down the line, who knows where we could be at and what's worked. So I would love that, and it's been an absolute pleasure being on. So thank you both.
No, thank you.
Pleasure. Man. How is best that people can actually find you on social media? Is there anywhere that you would like to kind of promote and things like that?
Well, I'm terrible at social media. If you want to see funny pictures of dogs and things that I've retweeted, then I'm on Twitter at DaveChawner, and I got my website, davechawner.co.uk.
That'd be great. Thanks very much, Dave. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, and thank you for all the work you're doing. It's really been great.
It's awesome.
It's mate. Thank you so much for having us on.